I genuinely believed Marcus and I were destined for each other, you know? The kind of love people write novels about. We met when he was 18 and I was 17, and I swear, something just shifted the moment our eyes met across that overcrowded house party. Within months, I'd basically moved into his apartment because, honestly, why waste time pretending when we both knew this was forever? He had this intensity about him, this drive, big dreams that I could tell were going to materialize into something real. The way he'd look at me in those early months, like I was the most extraordinary thing that had ever walked into his life, made me feel like I'd finally found exactly where I belonged. By the time he turned 21, he'd already proposed, and I just knew I'd made every single right decision leading up to that moment. Here was this man who was clearly heading somewhere incredible, who absolutely worshipped me, and who wanted to build an entire future with me. We waited until we were 26 to actually have the wedding, because Marcus wanted to be financially secure first, which I thought showed such maturity and responsibility. The wedding was absolutely everything I'd ever dreamed of, and I remember standing there thinking how incredibly lucky I was to have found someone who understood that I deserved to be treated like royalty. The best part was how Marcus handled absolutely everything. He made enough money that I didn't have to stress about work or bills or any of that tedious, mundane stuff that drains most people. When he suggested we spend 2.5 years living in Sydney and Auckland, I was absolutely thrilled. What kind of life would I have had with someone else, right? Probably stuck in some cramped studio apartment worrying about rent and working some soul-crushing dead-end job? Instead, I got to experience the world, pauses dramatically, all expenses paid, with a man who clearly adored me. Those years overseas were like an extended honeymoon, and I genuinely loved how other couples would look at us with such obvious envy. We were the couple everyone secretly wanted to be. When we came back and I got pregnant with Owen, I felt like my entire life was perfectly clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle. Marcus was so excited about becoming a father, and he made absolutely sure I had everything I needed throughout the pregnancy. He'd already been promoted twice at his firm, and his salary just kept climbing higher and higher. I didn't have to lift a finger around the house if I didn't want to, and he never once complained about being the sole provider. That's just the kind of man he was, always putting his family first, always making sure we were taken care of. The first 2 years with Owen were honestly magical, like something out of a movie. Marcus would come home from these long, exhausting, stressful days at the office and immediately take over with the baby so I could relax and decompress. He'd handle the nighttime feedings on weekends without complaint. He'd play with Owen for hours, pauses, and he made sure I never felt overwhelmed by motherhood. I remember thinking how different my experience was from other new mothers who constantly complained about their lazy, uninvolved husbands. Marcus was nothing like that. He was present, involved, and completely devoted to both of us. But, voice drops lower, with a hint of frustration, there was one thing that started to bother me more and more as time went on, like a splinter working its way deeper under my skin. Every single evening, without fail, Marcus would disappear onto our balcony with his cigarettes for an hour or two. He'd been smoking since he was 21, and I'd never really minded it before, but something about the routine started to feel incredibly selfish. Here I was, stuck in the house all day with a toddler, and the moment he got home, he'd spend maybe 30 minutes with us, and then, Titan delivery, vanish for his precious alone time. I tried to tell myself it was his way of decompressing from work, but it began to feel like he was actively choosing cigarettes over quality time with his family. Read quicker here. When Owen turned 2 and the lockdown started, I was absolutely going stir crazy. I'd been out of the workforce for over 2 years, and while I'd loved being a stay-at-home mother, I was starting to feel like I was losing myself, like my identity was just dissolving. That's when Brian, this director in a marketing agency, reached out about a personal assistant position. Pauses. The timing felt like absolute fate, like the universe was telling me something. And when he explained that I'd be the only woman in an all-male office, whispers. Something about that really appealed to me. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be around men who weren't related to me or married to my friends, you know? Marcus was supportive when I told him about the job opportunity, which was typical of him, sarcastically. He always wanted me to be happy, and if I wanted to go back to work, he was behind me 100%. Voice drops lower. I think part of me had hoped he might seem a little more concerned about the change, maybe ask more questions about what this would mean for our routine and our family dynamic, but he just smiled and said whatever I wanted to do was fine with him. Short pause, with a hint of suspicion. Looking back, I wonder if he was actually relieved to have me out of the house and busy with something that wasn't his responsibility. The first day at the new job was like stepping into a completely different universe. Read quicker here. Brian introduced me around the office, and I could feel every single man's attention on me in a way that I hadn't experienced in years. They were also polite, so genuinely interested in getting to know me, asking about my background and my thoughts on various projects and initiatives. During lunch, 3 different guys offered to show me around the neighborhood, and when I mentioned I had a 2-year-old at home, they all seemed impressed by how well I was balancing everything. Speak slowly for emphasis. What struck me most was how valued I felt in that space. These weren't men who saw me as just a wife and mother, just someone's domestic partner. They saw me as a professional, someone with opinions worth hearing and considering. Brian especially seemed to appreciate my input on things like always asking what I thought about client presentations or office policies or strategic decisions. Pauses. Voice tinged with resentment. When was the last time Marcus had asked for my opinion on anything work-related? He'd come home and tell me about his day, but it was always more like reporting facts than actually involving me in his world or treating me like an equal. By the end of the first week, I realized, slow down suddenly, how much I'd been missing, how much of myself I'd given up. The energy in that office was incredible, electric, and being the center of attention felt absolutely amazing. Whispers. Daniel from accounting started bringing me coffee every morning, and Ryan from the creative department would always find excuses to stop by my desk to chat about nothing and everything. Even Brian made comments about how the office felt more alive with me there, how I brought something special to their work environment, some kind of light. I started looking forward to getting dressed up each morning, putting on makeup, feeling attractive and appreciated and seen. Titan delivery. The contrast with my home life became more and more painfully obvious. I'd come home excited about my day, wanting to share stories about interesting projects or funny conversations, and Marcus would listen politely while playing with Owen. But then, voice drops lower, like absolute clockwork. He'd excuse himself for his evening smoke break, leaving me to handle dinner cleanup and Owen's entire bedtime routine. It was like he thought his workday ended when he got home, while mine just shifted into a different phase, a different set of responsibilities. 3 weeks into the job, something fundamentally shifted in how I saw everything, like a lens snapping into focus. I'd spent the day working on this important presentation with Brian, staying late to get it absolutely perfect, and when I finally got home around 8, Marcus was already on the balcony with his cigarette, Owen was crying because he was tired and hungry, and I had to immediately switch from feeling professional and valued to being the default parent who handled absolutely everything. When Marcus came back inside, he asked how my day was, but I could tell he wasn't really listening to my answer. He was already thinking about whatever he wanted to watch on television or what he needed to prepare for work tomorrow. That night, after Owen was finally asleep, Marcus sat down next to me on the couch and did something he rarely did anymore. He really looked at me, like he was studying my face, searching for something. And then he took my hands in his. "What's going on?" he asked. And his voice had this genuinely concerned tone that caught me completely off guard. "Where has my wife gone? Are you kidding me? I was right here, same as I'd always been, except now I was also contributing professionally and bringing in my own income and finding my own identity. If anything, I was more myself than I'd been in years. What do you mean? I asked, and I could hear the sharp edge in my own voice. You're different, he said, still holding my hands, still staring into my eyes like he was trying to solve some complicated puzzle. You seem distant, distracted. We barely talk anymore, and when we do, it feels like you're somewhere else entirely. I felt this surge of anger that surprised even me. Maybe I seem different because I'm finally doing something that makes me feel valued, I said, pulling my hands away from his. Maybe I'm tired of feeling like my only purpose is to be here, waiting for you to finish your cigarette breaks while you decompress from your important day. His face changed, and I could see I'd hit a nerve, struck something deep. My cigarette breaks? Gabrielle, I work 10-hour days to support this family. Those 20 minutes on the balcony are literally the only time I get to decompress, to just breathe. 20 minutes? I laughed, and it came out harsher than I intended. Marcus, you're out there for over an hour every single night. An hour when I'm handling everything else, when I could use some help or just some adult conversation that isn't about Owen's nap schedule or what he ate for lunch. We stared at each other, and I realized this was the first real argument we'd had in 11 years together. 11 years, and we never fought like this, never had this kind of raw tension between us. Part of me was almost excited by it, like we were finally addressing things that had been building up under the surface for so long. I had no idea you felt that way, he said, finally, and he sounded genuinely hurt, wounded. Gabrielle, everything I do is for you and Owen. The long hours, the stress, the constant pressure to keep advancing in my career so we can have the life we want, the life you deserve. But that was exactly the problem, wasn't it? He thought providing money was the same thing as providing attention, as being emotionally present. I do understand that, but I need more than just financial security. I need to feel like you're actually interested in me as a person, not just as the mother of your child and the woman who keeps your house running smoothly. The conversation went on for another hour. And by the end of it, absolutely nothing felt resolved. Nothing felt better. Marcus promised to be more mindful of his evening routine, and I promised to communicate better when I was feeling neglected. But something fundamental had shifted between us. I went to bed that night feeling like we'd crossed some kind of invisible line, and I wasn't sure we could ever cross back to where we'd been. The next few weeks were awkward in a way our relationship had never been before, like walking on eggshells constantly. Marcus did make an effort to cut his smoking break shorter, and he asked more questions about my work, but it felt forced, performative. Meanwhile, the attention I was getting at the office intensified dramatically. Brian started including me in client meetings, saying he valued my perspective and my insights. Daniel and Ryan both found reasons to text me work-related questions in the evenings, sometimes veering into more personal territory. The whole environment made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was even possible. One Friday, Brian asked if I wanted to grab drinks with the team after work. It was the first time I'd been invited to anything social, and I was genuinely excited until I remembered I needed to get home to Owen. When I explained, Brian looked genuinely disappointed. You know, Gabrielle, you're too good to be stuck at home all the time. You should prioritize yourself more. Put yourself first for once. That comment stuck with me all weekend, replaying in my mind on loop. Here was my boss, someone who barely knew me, recognizing that I deserved more than just domestic responsibilities. Meanwhile, Marcus seemed perfectly content with our routine, with me being available whenever he needed me, but never really considering what I might need or want. On Sunday, we took Owen to the park for a family day out, something we'd done hundreds of times before, but this time felt different, charged with something unspoken. I deliberately left my wedding ring on the bathroom counter that morning, not really knowing why, just feeling like I needed to see what it felt like to go out in the world without that symbol of being claimed, of belonging to someone. Marcus didn't notice at first, and we spent the morning pushing Owen on swings and chasing him around the playground like everything was perfectly normal, like we were still that enviable couple. But during lunch, when I reached for my water bottle, Marcus's eyes went straight to my bare ring finger. His face went completely white, drained of all color. "Where's your wedding ring?" he asked, and his voice had this panicked quality I'd never heard before, this desperation. I looked down at my hand like I was just noticing for the first time. "Oh, I must have forgotten to put it back on after my shower," I said. But we both knew that wasn't true. We both knew exactly what this meant. I never forgot my wedding ring. In 12 years, I'd never once left the house without it, not a single time. "Gabrielle," he said, and now he was using that same concerned tone from our fight a few weeks earlier. "What's really going on here? Talk to me, please." Something about the way he was looking at me, the raw desperation in his voice, made me realize this was the moment. This was when I needed to be completely honest about what I'd been feeling, about what I wanted, about where this was all heading. "I think I want to leave," I said, and the words came out more calmly than I expected, like I'd been rehearsing them. The silence stretched between us while Owen played with his toy cars, completely oblivious to the fact that their parents' marriage was falling apart right in front of him. Marcus's face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on something that looked like absolute devastation, like his world was ending. "Leave?" he repeated slowly. "Leave what? Leave me?" "I love you," I said, because that was true. "You're an amazing father and you're an incredible provider. But I'm not in love with you anymore, Marcus. I haven't been for a while now." I watched him process this information, and I felt this strange mixture of sadness and relief washing over me. Finally, it was out there in the open. Finally, we could stop pretending everything was perfect when I'd been feeling so empty and unfulfilled for so long. "I don't understand," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper, broken. "What did I do wrong? How do we fix this? Tell you what to do." It's not about fixing anything. It's about accepting that we've grown into different people and maybe we're not compatible anymore. Maybe we never really were, and it just took me this long to realize it, to see the truth. Marcus spent the rest of that afternoon trying desperately to convince me to reconsider. He suggested marriage counseling, promised to quit smoking completely, offered to cut back his work hours significantly. He even started crying at one point, which was something I'd seen maybe twice in our entire relationship. But watching him fall apart like that didn't make me want to stay. It just confirmed that I'd already emotionally checked out, that I was already gone. "It's too late," I told him as we packed up Owen's toys. "My mind is made up." That evening, after Owen was in bed, we had the conversation about logistics, about how this would actually work. I explained that I'd need financial support to get my own place, and Marcus agreed immediately without any argument. He said he'd remortgage the house to give me £15,000 and we could sell the luxury Range Rover and split the profits evenly. I was honestly surprised by how cooperative he was being, how he seemed willing to give me whatever I asked for without putting up a fight. "I just want you to be happy," he said, and he meant it, I could tell. "If this is what you need, then okay. I won't stand in your way." Part of me had expected him to fight harder, to refuse to make it easy for me to leave, to beg me to stay. But Marcus was handling it exactly like he handled everything else, with practical solutions and minimal drama, always so controlled. I moved out 2 weeks later into a nice apartment closer to my office, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe freely. The freedom was absolutely intoxicating. I could come and go as I pleased, accept those after-work drink invitations, stay up late watching whatever I wanted on television. I set up a Tinder profile because why shouldn't I? I was single now, and I deserved to feel desired, to remember what it was like when someone was excited just to spend time with me, when I was someone's priority. The responses were overwhelming in the best way. Dozens of matches, hundreds of messages from men who thought I was beautiful, interesting, worth pursuing and getting to know. Derek was the first one I actually met in person, and he was everything Marcus wasn't. He was spontaneous, flirtatious, completely focused on me when we were together. On our second date, when he told me I was the most captivating woman he'd ever met, I realized how long it had been since anyone had made me feel that special, that seen. Ryan was different from Derek, but equally attentive in his own way. He was more intellectual, always asking about my thoughts on books and movies and current events and philosophy. When we'd text late into the night, he'd send these long, thoughtful messages about whatever we'd been discussing. It felt like he actually saw me as a complete person, not just as someone's wife and mother, not just as a role I was playing. I ended up sleeping with both of them, and I didn't feel guilty about it at all. Why should I? I was prioritizing my own happiness for the first time in years, figuring out what I wanted and needed from a relationship, from life. Owen was adjusting fine to our new arrangement, spending weekdays with me and weekends with Marcus. Kids are resilient, and honestly, he was probably better off seeing his mother as a strong, independent woman rather than someone who settled for less than she deserved, right? The other 3 guys I went out with were nice enough, interesting in their own ways, but nothing serious developed with any of them. That was fine with me, though. I was enjoying the variety, the excitement of never knowing who I might meet or what kind of connection we might have. For the first time in my adult life, I was living entirely for myself, and it felt incredible, liberating. 7 weeks into this new chapter of my life, Marcus called me unexpectedly. I thought maybe he wanted to adjust our custody schedule or discuss some financial detail about the divorce proceedings, but his tone was different, more formal, distant, in a way that made my stomach drop. "I need some closure," he said. "I need to ask you some direct questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me about everything." Something about the way he said it made my stomach flip uncomfortably. "Okay," I said, settling onto my couch with a glass of wine. "Are you dating?" he asked directly. I hesitated for a second, not because I was ashamed, but because I wasn't sure how much detail he really wanted to hear. "Yes," I said finally. "I've been on some dates." "How many?" The question caught me completely off guard. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me," he said, and there was something cold in his voice I'd never heard before. Something hard. "How many, Gabrielle?" "5, I said. "I've been on dates with 5 different people." The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped or disconnected. "Have you slept with any of them?" he asked finally. I felt this flash of anger rise up in my chest. What right did he have to ask me that? We were separated, heading toward divorce. My personal life was none of his business anymore. It wasn't his concern. "Marcus, I don't think that's—" "Have you slept with any of them?" he repeated. And now his voice was completely flat, emotionless. "2, I said. "I've been intimate with 2 of them." Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice dropped, sounded like a completely different person, like a stranger. "Okay, that's what I needed to know. Thank you for being honest." "Wait," I said, because suddenly I was panicking. This conversation wasn't going the way I'd expected at all. "Why are you asking me this? What does it matter now?" "It doesn't matter. You're right. You're single. You can do whatever you want with whomever you want." But something in his tone suggested it mattered very much, that this information had changed something fundamental. "Marcus, are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine. I'm moving on just like you are. We're both moving forward with our lives." "Moving on?" I repeated slowly. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I'm accepting that our marriage is over," he said matter-of-factly. "It means I'm starting to date other people too. I'm putting myself out there." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I'd somehow never considered that Marcus would move on, would find someone else, would replace me. In my mind, he was just supposed to be there waiting in case I ever decided I wanted to come back, that I'd made a mistake. But he pushed those uncomfortable feelings aside and focused on my own life, on my own journey. A few months later, I started seeing Tyler more seriously, and when he asked if I wanted to make things Facebook official, I said yes. It felt good to post pictures of us together, to show the world that I was happy and moving forward with my life. I made sure to use photos where I looked particularly beautiful, where it was obvious that I was thriving, that leaving had been the right choice. Still, something felt off, wrong somehow. I'd scroll through social media and see pictures of Marcus at various events, always with different women, always looking confident and happy and unburdened. He'd lost weight, updated his entire wardrobe, and seemed to be living his absolute best life. Meanwhile, I was struggling more than I'd expected with the financial reality of being single, of being on my own. My salary was decent, but it was nothing compared to what Marcus made, nowhere close. I'd had to downsize my lifestyle significantly, and I missed the security of knowing all the bills were handled, that everything was taken care of. More than that, I missed having daily access to Owen. Our custody arrangement meant I saw him less than I'd anticipated, less than I had calculated. And when he was with Marcus, I felt this constant anxiety about what I might be missing, what moments were happening without me. Marcus would send me pictures of them at the zoo or the park or some restaurant, and Owen always looked so happy, so content. Part of me wondered if he was actually better off with his father, which was a thought I tried not to entertain too often because it hurt too much. 8 months after our separation, I realized I'd made a mistake. Not the mistake of leaving necessarily, but the mistake of thinking Marcus would wait around forever while I figured out what I wanted, while I explored my options. He was clearly thriving without me, and that wasn't supposed to happen at all. We'd been together for 12 years. Didn't that count for something? Didn't that history mean anything? I started reaching out more frequently, asking about Owen, but also just checking in on him personally. "How are you doing?" I'd text, and he'd respond politely, but briefly, never elaborating. When I suggested we'd grab coffee to discuss Owen's birthday party, he agreed, but when we met up, he was friendly, but distant. He treated me like a co-parent, nothing more, nothing special. "We've been thinking," I said toward the end of our coffee meeting, "about us, about our family, about what we had. I know I made some mistakes, but maybe we could try counseling now. Maybe we're in both a better place to work on things, to rebuild." Marcus looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him choosing his words carefully, deliberately. "Gabrielle," he said finally, "I offered you counseling when you first said you wanted to leave. You said it was too late, that your mind was made up, that nothing could change how you felt." "People change their minds," I said. "People make mistakes and learn from them. That's part of being human." "You're right," he said, "but some mistakes have permanent consequences that can't be undone." I felt tears starting to form, which surprised me. "So that's it? 12 years together and you're just done? You're just giving up on us?" "You were done 8 months ago," he said, not unkindly. "You were done when you took off your wedding ring and told me you weren't in love with me anymore. You were done when you moved out and started dating other people. I'm just finally catching up to where you've already been." "But we have Owen," I said. "We have a family, a life together." "We have a son," he corrected gently, "and we'll always be connected because of that, always be in each other's lives. But our family, the way you're thinking of it, ended when you decided to prioritize your happiness over his stability." That phrase hit me hard, because I'd said almost exactly those words to justify my choices to friends and family. Hearing them repeated back to me made them sound different, selfish, in a way I hadn't intended, hadn't seen before. "I miss you," I said, and it was true. I missed the security, the partnership, the way he'd always made sure everything was taken care of, that I never had to worry. I miss us. Marcus's expression softened slightly. "You know you do," he said, "but missing someone isn't the same as loving them, and it's definitely not the same as being in love with them. You taught me that lesson yourself." Over the next few months, I tried several more times to convince him that we should give our marriage another chance, that what we had was worth saving. I wrote long emails explaining how much I'd grown, how much clearer I was about what I wanted, about who I was. I suggested we start slowly, maybe just as friends, and see if we could rebuild the connection we'd once had, find our way back. His responses were always polite but firm, consistent. He'd moved on, he said. He was dating someone new, someone who was sure about what she wanted, and he wasn't interested in going backward, in returning to something that had already ended. When I asked why he couldn't forgive me, why he couldn't give us another chance, he said it wasn't about forgiveness at all. It's about trust. It's about knowing that when things get difficult, when life gets hard, we're both committed to working through them together. You showed me that when you're unhappy, your solution is to leave, to find happiness elsewhere. I can't build a life with someone knowing that, wondering when it'll happen again. That phrase hit me hard, because I'd said almost exactly those words to justify my choices to friends and family. Hearing them repeated back to me made them sound different, selfish, in a way I hadn't intended, hadn't seen before. "I miss you," I said. And it was true. I missed the security, the partnership, the way he'd always made sure everything was taken care of, that I never had to worry. I miss us. Marcus's expression softened slightly. "I know you do," he said, "but missing someone isn't the same as loving them, and it's definitely not the same as being in love with them. You taught me that lesson yourself." Over the next few months, I tried several more times to convince him that we should give our marriage another chance, that what we had was worth saving. I wrote long emails explaining how much I'd grown, how much clearer I was about what I wanted, about who I was. I suggested we start slowly, maybe just as friends, and see if we could rebuild the connection we'd once had, find our way back. His responses were always polite but firm, consistent. He'd moved on, he said. He was dating someone new, someone who was sure about what she wanted, and he wasn't interested in going backward, in returning to something that had already ended. When I asked why he couldn't forgive me, why he couldn't give us another chance, he said it wasn't about forgiveness at all. "It's about trust," he explained. "It's about knowing that when things get difficult, when life gets hard, we're both committed to working through them together. You showed me that when you're unhappy, your solution is to leave, to find happiness elsewhere. I can't build a life with someone knowing that, wondering when it'll happen again." When I looked at where I ended up, it was hard not to feel like Marcus was being unnecessarily harsh, unforgiving. Sure, I'd made some mistakes, but I was going through something, trying to figure out who I was outside of being a wife and mother. Wasn't that normal? Wasn't that something a loving husband should have been more patient with, more understanding about? But Marcus had always been black and white about everything, about life. And apparently that extended to marriage too. There was no gray area for him, no room for nuance, no room for human mistakes or personal growth or second chances. Once I'd shown him that I could be unhappy enough to leave, he'd written me off completely, just crossed me out of his future. So here I was, 8 months later, still trying to understand how 12 years together could end so definitively, so finally. Still wondering why he couldn't see that what we'd had was worth fighting for, worth rebuilding from the ground up. Still hoping that eventually he'd realize he missed me too, that he'd wake up one day and want me back, and we could find a way back to each other, back to what we had. But as more time passed, as he seemed more and more settled in his new life, more content without me, I was starting to accept that maybe this really was permanent. Maybe some mistakes really couldn't be undone, couldn't be fixed, and maybe the life I'd walked away from was gone forever.